Welcome to Cashed Out, where we dive deep into some of the most notorious robberies of financial institutions in history. I'm your host, Michael Dwyer, and today we have a guest. We have a guest who we did a podcast for a long time together, and he just happened to be off tomorrow and invited him in. And so today I introduce you guys to Glenn Smith.
Thanks, man. I'm pretty excited to be here.
Well, I'm glad to have you. So today, Glenn,
Yep.
we're going to examine one of the most perplexing crimes ever committed. It was a heist so well executed, so meticulously planned, and so bold that it shocked the nation and became the stuff of legend. Picture this. A group of thieves infiltrated Colombia's central bank, the Banco de la República, and made off with an astronomical amount of money. But unlike many other high-profile heists, the aftermath of this robbery would remain shrouded in mystery for decades. This is the Asalto al Banco de la República, also known as the robbery of the century in Bogota, Colombia.
Oh shit.
The year is 1994, and Colombia was going through change. In June, there was a 6.8 magnitude earthquake that struck the Paez River, causing mudslides and avalanches that killed about 1,100 people.
Oh my god.
I know. I mean, this was like their World Trade Center. Like, they lost a lot.
Holy smokes.
So shortly after that, they ended up signing the free trade agreement, which allowed trades between Colombia, Venezuela, and Mexico, similar to what we have with Canada and Mexico.
Sure.
And then there was also the change in leadership as Ernesto Samper won the presidential election, but it was not without controversy. See, there were accusations that his campaign was funded by the Cali cartel. And in Colombia, the Cali cartel was founded by a few members who had broke away and started their own cartel. Originally, they were with the Medellin cartel. Now, if the Medellin cartel sounds familiar, it should. It was founded and led by Pablo Escobar.
Oh shit. the show Escobar.
I know.
Yeah.
And in 1994, at that time, they ruled the streets with violence, drug trade, and political manipulation. So essentially, there's Big Brother, the Medellins, and then there's Cali Cartel, who's trying to get there, but they're just not at that level. Now, the nation was engulfed in chaos of the drug wars, but the financial heart of Colombia, where the Banco de la República, or the Bank of the Republic was, it was seen as a financial institution that should have been like impenetrable. Nobody could do it. 4 floors, vaults in basement.
Fort Knox.
Yeah. But as Colombia's central bank, it was the pillar of the country's economy. I mean, safeguarding, it didn't have just like Colombian pesos. It had all of the denominations for different countries, and
Oh wow.
like whatever they traded with
So
countries,
that was
they
the foreign
kept.
exchange bank.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Yep. The bank itself was, like you said, housed in like a fortress-like building in the middle of Bogota. Its vaults considered among the most secure in the country. But, and there's always a but, what the bank didn't know was that there were those on the outside, and even within the institution itself, who were willing to exploit every crack in its security. The Bank of the Republic was about to become the target of a heist that would rattle the very foundation of the Colombian financial system. Let's break in the characters here. We have the main character or the mastermind behind this all. His name is Benigno Suarez Rincon, also known as Don Pacho. And for the sake of everybody, I'm going to call him Don Pacho.
Don Pacho.
throughout this.
A lot easier.
But remember I told you about the Medellin cartel?
Yes.
The same cartel that's ran by Pablo Escobar. Well, Don Pacho, he was the former lieutenant to one of the men who founded the cartel with Pablo. So he was like pretty high up there. He was,
Sure.
if we're talking executives, he's right underneath them. He'd done his fair share of dirt and was nowhere near a good guy, and he had earned himself the moniker El Mexicano. Well, 8 months prior to this robbery, Don Pacho began devising a plan to rob the bank. And then 5 months later, he found himself working on executing that plan with a man named Alexander Flores Salcedo. See, Alexander was Don Pacho's lieutenant, his right-hand man, but they knew they would need more than just the two of them. So what do? They needed
third.
They needed more than three if it's getting into this fortress.
Alarming.
Yeah, and they needed people to make sure their eyes, essentially police eyes and bank eyes, looked the other way. And so they recruited the chief of judicial police in Cesar department.
Oh shit.
Yeah, they went high. They got Lieutenant Juan Carlos Carrillo Peña. And they also ended up recruiting a guy named Jamie Bonilla. He was a lawyer and a former investigator of the technical course of the National Directorate of Criminal Investigations. It's a long ass title.
It is crazy how money will turn a good person bad
really quickly. I mean, and it wasn't just the money, because not only is it, hey, you can make a lot of money, most people be like, no, but then these are cartels.
Right.
So it's like, well, also if you say no, we're gonna kill your family.
Sure, yeah.
So it's like, do I take a risk and make money, or do I say no, probably get killed and my family get killed too?
Oh man. That's tough.
But they recruited him, which was huge. Recruiting a chief of police and a man who worked for the department that advises the attorney general. Like, that's what that long ass title's for. So they were in pretty good. But as you probably know, this wasn't a smash and grab. It wasn't a rush job. It was careful, it was calculated, and it all began with one key factor: inside information. And Jamie and Juan were especially useful in looking into the bank's surveillance system. They had the involvement of that insider, which happened to be a security guard at the Bank of the Republic. And his knowledge of the bank's security systems would prove invaluable. The inside man was in a perfect position to assist the robbers. He worked directly with the bank's vaults. He had access to the alarm systems, and he was familiar with the security schedules. Who better, right? Juan Carlos also had a crew, like a full crew, that included experts in surveillance and lockpicking and hacking. These people could disable the vault's alarms and bypass security systems and never leave a trace.
Good night.
But what really set them all apart was, really the ability to blend in. Because, like I said, this was not a regular robbery. So a lot of times, they're not going in masked up, hats on. They're blending in with normal people that day and not being suspicious. They didn't want to appear as typical bank robbers. So there were no guns, there were no masks, but instead their plan was to infiltrate the bank unnoticed, gather as much intelligence over those 5 months, and then strike when the time was right. And over the next several months, Juan Carlos and his crew would spend their days monitoring the bank's routine, figuring out when the bank was least guarded and when the guards took their breaks, and also when there was the fewest amount of witnesses inside. And with that bank insider's help, they had access to everything they needed to know. mean, they knew the vault's location, security codes, even the weaknesses in the building's alarm system. And with us both working at a bank,
Yeah.
like we knew that information. Like we knew if we wanted to rob a bank, the best time,
Sure.
how it works,
Right,
even
yeah.
probably how to get away with it.
Yeah.
The vault's location was, like I said, deep on the bottom basement floor of it all, of this 4-floor building. But to get into the vault, they needed to practice. So they flew in welding equipment from Canada, and they practiced breaking into safes
Oh my God.
for months.
These guys are dedicated.
And after months of preparation, they were finally ready. All right, so they have their machines. They're ready to carry out this robbery. And they were going to stay at this hotel in Valledupar. But it was originally planned to be the week of October 7th. But that changed because the newly sworn in president, Ernesto Samper, was staying at the hotel that they were planning on staying at. And it ended up bringing a lot more attention to them than they wanted.
Sure.
So they had to push it back a week.
See, that's smart. Go back. Don't move it forward.
Right.
Don't rush it. Yeah.
So they pushed it back to October 16th, 1994. And they put their plan in motion. Now, one thing I failed to mention so far before we dive into this plan is how the hell are they getting this money? Because flying in the machines and practicing, it's expensive. Well, they had a private funder named Elkin Sousa, also known as Camillo, and he financed the robbery with about 120 million Colombian pesos. Which, you want to guess about how much that is in US dollars?
120 million pesos. I have no idea.
$27,000.
27,000?
$27,000.
That's it?
Yeah. He helped them to plan that entire crime, though. And they had planned every detail. At least, they thought they did.
Oh, fuck.
On the morning of the heist, Don Pacho and Jamie camped out at that hotel that I told you about. And they were watching and communicating through radios. And by 6 a.m., the crew had dressed up as maintenance workers, and they were carrying supplies and tools under the guise that they were going to help repair the AC units inside the building. Nobody questioned. And this allowed them to slip into the building unnoticed. At first, just 2. But by 6:15, they were back in a truck covered in blankets, kind of like the movie show. They were backing that down into the bank's garage. And inside of that truck was 14 thieves hidden in the back. I told you, this was no ordinary robbery. Like I said, there were no masks, there were no guns. The criminals just entered the building as if they were part of the normal routine, confident that no one would raise an eyebrow. And they didn't. They were let in by Winston Tarifa, that security guard I told you about earlier. As soon as they were in, they immediately grabbed and tied up 3 innocent security guards. And at that point, they had access to the security systems without interruption. So the plan was to disable the bank's security system without arousing any suspicion. It took them about, I'd say, an hour to disable all of the alarms.
Holy fuck, though, dude.
I know.
It's scary to be going on that long.
But they did it.
Yeah.
They deactivated all of the alarms, they'd set up their welding equipment, and they were ready to get to work on the vault. They brought in 23 oxygen tanks, 1 acetylene tank, 35 meters of 3-phase cable, 2 air compressors, an exhaust fan, a mallet, surgical gloves, and a bunch of random other tools, hammers, all of that. And so on to the vaults, right? We're at the vaults, and the vaults are on the lower floor. They're designed to withstand just about any form of attack. I mean, they were reinforced with thick metal steel doors like the ones we would imagine. They had their own alarm systems, they had several layers of security, but the thieves had already identified the weak points because they'd been practicing. But just because they knew their weak points didn't mean that things would go as planned. And they didn't. Halfway through the robbery, the unexpected happened. A power outage in the area shut down power to the bank.
Oh no.
I mean, imagine this, dude. It's hard enough trying to rob a bank itself, but to completely lose power, no lights, no anything, like
That's tough.
10 times harder. But fortunately for them, they were able to use the oxygen and acetylene tanks to continue kind of pushing forward, and the light from them kind of shooting off the vault gave them enough light to proceed. Although it was slower than they expected. Like 18 hours slow.
What?
Yeah, they went in on a Sunday and it was 18 hours slow.
Oh my god.
But their ingenuity got them through the exterior armored door and an auxiliary door, like the little glass or somewhat glacious type door in between there. And then they were right into the vault. And within minutes, they were, systemically removing stacks of cash. I mean, it was a clean job. Nothing disturbed, no alarms went off, nothing left behind, really. When they were finished, they had taken an estimated 24 billion Colombian pesos, with a B. In US dollars, about 33 million US dollars. Unfortunately, though, they had to leave about 6 billion Colombian pesos, not because they couldn't, get away with it, but they just didn't have room in the truck. It was either 6 billion Colombian pesos or leave 3 people behind. But on their way out, they ended up tying up Winston Tarifa. They placed fake explosives on him to make him pass like he was a victim. And then they made their escape. And their preparations got them in and out of there in 21 hours total. They left the bank at 2:51 a.m. the next morning. Almost 12 hours later, one of those guards that was tied up was able to break free, and he called and notified the police of what happened. The police sprang into action quickly, but by this time, 21 hours of being in there, they had to have an escape plan ready.
Right.
And they did. The funds had moved around quite a bit. They originally left the bank, and they ended up taking them to a mattress store. Why? I guess nobody buys mattresses on Sundays. But from the mattress store, they split the money up between like 2 beer trucks, and they ended up transporting money throughout Colombia. Different cities, kind of dropping some off here and there. At first, they were planning on leaving for Bucaramanga. I probably butchered that one, but instead, they ended up deciding to take a road to Barranquilla and settled on a farm in Ciénaga. Now, one of those groups that was traveling to Ciénaga ended up stopping in a city called Fundación. And this is important because, you'd think they're traveling with money in the back of a truck, it's flying out. Well, this group decided to stop, pull over, and pack the money in cigarette boxes. In the event they get pulled over, it looks like they're transporting cigarettes. Which, is kind of smart.
Sure.
But also time consuming. But on their way to Ciénaga, after doing all of this, something happened that was not in their plan. they ended up encountering traffic guards who did stop their truck. And so they had to offer them money to continue.
Oh, shit.
But here's the thing. It's not the normal situation where like you pull over, you're like, I'm going to kill you, or you take money.
Mm-hmm.
When they were pulled over, they were like, hey, either you take this money or we're all going to kill ourselves and make this a bloody scene here for you guys.
Holy crap.
And so the guards were like, okay, we'll take the money. And they did.
Holy smokes.
So they took the money, let them pass through, and they went on about their day. And then the guards just left.
Fuck yeah, I'd get out of there too.
So they made it to Ciénaga, and you would think, all right, let's split this money, let's take it, let's go somewhere, do whatever. But guess what they did with the money when they got there?
What? Flaunted it, spent it.
No. They parked in a parking lot, got out the truck, and just left it.
Somebody stole it?
No, they just left the truck in the middle of a parking lot filled with billions of pesos. It's crazy. Like, at this point, what started out as like a well-planned robbery, you gotta think they're like, man, like at this point, what the hell do we do?
Yeah.
Let's just leave it in a parking lot and go. 4 billion Colombian pesos ended up disappearing. Just like they don't know where it is. Like $2.7 million just gone. So back at the bank, the guard had called police and was able to notify them, and police jumped on it immediately. Like, this is their biggest bank. We got to figure out what's going on.
Right.
And so they were able to notify, the bank itself was able to notify the police of all the serial numbers for every bill that was taken.
Damn.
Which is a lot. But because they did this, now police have literally a list of all of these bills that are essentially non-circulated, so they should be fraudulent.
Right.
And the bills lose half their value immediately. You can't spend them put them in bank accounts. You can't spend them at any government facility. Most stores are probably looking out for them too, or if they make a deposit, they're just gonna tell you're in the area.
Sure.
So they ended up taking these bills and kind of selling them for half the value to people. Ended up getting about half of that 33 million, which I mean is still $16.5 million. But this robbery of the century just went from 33 million to 16.5. And while they were still working, trying to, get everything situated, the police were still working. Somehow, and I'm not sure if it's because he was casing the place or what, but they were able to identify Jamie. Here's my confusion, right? Jamie was at the hotel with Don Pacho. So when and how they identified Jamie, it truly confuses me. I've looked everywhere to see if I could find information on how they got him, but honestly, I couldn't find anything.
Interesting.
But either way, they identified Jamie, and they blasted his picture over all of media. I mean, they were talking his name on the radio, TV, any way you could see it. In 1994, it was there. Here's the thing. When you're doing illegal activity, the last thing you need is a spotlight on you. And the Cali and the Medellin cartel agreed. So Jamie's face being all over the news as part of the robbery of the century didn't really help them out at all.
So they had to get rid of him.
You would think so. But what they ended up doing, many of the gang members, because he was still a lawyer, he still held a prominent role, they pressured him to turn himself in. They wanted him to take the fall as the mastermind, say he set it up, and it just be him go down for it. And eventually Jamie did turn himself in. But it wasn't because they pressured him. It's rumored that the pressure from the gangs didn't motivate him at all, but instead it was pressure from the police, the ones who were involved, the ones who turned the eye or took payments. They didn't want to be named, and so they threatened to kill him if he didn't turn himself in.
Oh shit.
And if we know one thing, in Colombia at this time, if a police killed someone, it was not questioned.
Right.
So he turned himself in. He didn't really tell on anybody when he did it as well. All in all, though, the police ended up interviewing over 100 people that they suspected of being a part of the robbery. They ended up narrowing their numbers down to 21 people and sentenced them for having participated in the crime, but another 40 people were sentenced for crimes like receiving stolen goods or the traffic officers who stopped them and took money.
Right.
They ended up being sentenced as well. But here's the crazy thing. For robbing a bank, as big of a robbery as they did, no one received a sentence more than 20 years. Including Don Pacho, who was caught. Jamie, who got caught. And Juan Pena, who was the chief of police, who ended up getting caught as well.
Maybe it's because like nobody was hurt, like there was no guns or anything involved.
I would think so, but like here, I mean, if you rob a federal institution, it's 10 years without a gun, longer with a gun. But I would think if you rob one that big for that much, they're taking that into consideration. So they caught all of them. They're all arrested, and they all have $33 million to speak about.
Do we know from robbery to when they were caught, how long was it?
It was about 4 days.
Damn.
So it was not long at all. But about, I think it said about 8.7 billion pesos were never recovered, which I mean comes out to about like $4 million of the 33 million.
Is it just floating around in Colombia somewhere, huh?
Yeah, probably still out there somewhere.
Wow.
But yeah, this was Colombia's biggest robbery. And to date, I think the largest dollar amount robbery that we've told on the podcast.
Yeah, awesome.
Well, Glenn, thank you for being here, and everybody else, thank y'all for joining us on Cashed Out. If you enjoyed this week's episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. We'll be back next week with another story from the world of true crime. And until then, stay safe and stay vigilant.